Don Richard's testimony, the purpose was to corroborate Cassie's story. So Don Richard told a very disturbing story about how she saw Diddy hit Cassie with a skillet while she was cooking eggs. Now, this was a huge part of her testimony. She said that he attacked her with a skillet and that Cassie went down on the ground in a fetal position, basically saying she knew what was going to happen when he came at her in that room. Don Richard went on to say that after this happened, Diddy brought her and another woman into his recording studio the following day, and he told them that this was not something they should talk about, and in fact threatened them by saying, "Where I come from, people that talk disappear." So Dawn Richard testified that she perceived this as a threat to keep her mouth shut. And prosecutors were looking to use that not only to corroborate Cassie's testimony, but to talk about Diddy and his pattern of silencing victims and those around him and using his power to keep people quiet while doing his bidding. Now, prosecutors got that out into the testimony about this violent act Diddy against Cassie. But the defense really went hard at Richard during cross-examination. They were able to point out the inconsistency of her story over time. They asked a lot of questions about, did you hear the skillet fall? Did you hear something hit the wall? What actually happened that day? And pointed out that in prior interviews, the story had evolved and changed. The most important part of Richard's testimony for the prosecution is the threat that was made after by Diddy to Richard, basically saying, keep your mouth shut or something bad is going to happen. Well, the defense was really able to pick that apart on cross-examination. They pointed out that had never come up in 7 interviews with the government prior to trial. And in fact, that part was just added to her story this week. So the defense was really able to undermine her credibility, point out how the story had changed significantly over time, and how that one detail, the most important to the prosecution, that threat, was something that she had not reported in the past. So all in all, the defense did a great job of attacking her credibility on the stand. On cross-examination, the defense has a couple of goals, and one is to impeach credibility. And so they point out other motivations for the testimony. Why would the testimony change at the time of trial from what somebody said years and years before, or didn't bring up years before? Well, in this case, for Dawn Richard, the defense says it was financial gain. She's bringing a civil lawsuit seeking compensation. So that's her motivation for testifying the way that she did on the stand. Kerry Morgan took the stand and talked about her relationship with Cassie Ventura, and it started off with Kerry explaining how they met, that they became best friends, they moved in together in Manhattan in 2004, talked about all of the things that they did together. And one of those things was go out. She said they went out, they went to dinners, they went to clubs, and it was a focus of the prosecution on direct examination to ask, did you both drink together? And so maybe this seemed a bit innocuous, but to me, I picked up the narrative prosecutors are laying down, which is prior to meeting Diddy, Cassie didn't really do any drugs. She didn't even really drink. This is what Kerry testified to. She said that anytime they would go out and have drinks, that Cassie would end up being sick. They didn't really drink that much together. So this was something that I expect to see being extrapolated on by the prosecution to kind of say that Diddy really did influence her to take drugs and ultimately become an addict. So there was the foundation there. She also testified that she and Cassie are no longer friends. And the reason? Because she didn't want to be involved in their problems anymore. She said they had a volatile relationship. She also said that she didn't even want to be here to testify today, that she was called via a subpoena, and so she had to be. But she did not want to be here on her own, and she left that part of her life and all of their problems behind her.
Kerry Morgan also testified about a very specific instance of Diddy attacking Cassie. Can you tell me about that?
Kerry Morgan testified about 2 very specific and very violent acts by Diddy against Cassie. One was at his Hollywood Hills home, where Cassie was forced to flee. And in fact, they heard Diddy driving around trying to find them. Eventually, Cassie went home and it seemed to blow over. Another instance was a trip to Jamaica. She heard Cassie scream in a way that she described as guttural and terrifying. She saw Combs dragging Cassie by her hair, and the fight continued into the driveway, where she saw Combs push Cassie down, resulting in Cassie hitting her head on a brick. The elements of sex trafficking is engaging in commercial sex through force, fraud, or coercion. So the key words here, and what the jury is going to need to decide, is was Cassie coerced into engaging in the freak-offs, or was she there on her own volition? What we heard today, both from Dawn Richard and from Kerry Morgan, is that violence was not something Cassie was a stranger to at the hands of Diddy. What you're going to hear on summation is prosecutors closing that loop and tying the violence that Cassie experienced to her engaging in the freak-offs, meaning she engaged in them because the alternative was for her to be beaten. And what we're hearing from these witnesses today is corroboration that this was a very violent relationship and that Cassie really didn't have a choice in the matter when it came to Sean Combs. And that's how prosecutors are going to close the loop. And they're going to use all these corroborating witnesses to show that Cassie was really under his thumb because of fear of violence. Cassie Ventura's testimony was really important for the prosecution, and she's actually the star witness, but she laid the foundation for what's to come. She identified individuals who are potentially going to be co-conspirators in the criminal enterprise. She explained who the cast of characters are, and she also talked about other things that are going to matter in this case when it comes to the charges: drugs, guns, kidnapping, arson, you name it, it came up during her testimony. But the witnesses that are to come this week are really critical to the prosecution's case when it comes to establishing the RICO conspiracy charge. That's crimes that are committed in furtherance of a criminal enterprise. Here you have a criminal enterprise of one, Diddy. So his co-conspirators, who presumably have deals with the government, are set to testify. Two of them are on the witness list this week. One is his former personal chef, and another is his former personal assistant. Listen for that testimony to really close the loop on the means and manner of the criminal enterprise, meaning explaining what it is and how it functions. This is really important for the prosecution to establish that element of the crime. Also, Cassie Ventura's mother is set to take the stand. She's on the witness list. That is going to be very emotional testimony. She's a corroboration witness, meaning we're going to learn what she knew and when about Cassie's relationship with Diddy. Many of the witnesses in this trial are still under seal. We're only learning week to week who's going to testify. Is it possible some of those big celebrity names may be called into the courtroom? It's possible, but it's unlikely. We already saw a whole host of individuals on the people and places list. These are people who may come up during the course of evidence or testimony, but aren't necessarily going to be called as witnesses. Witnesses here are not going to be people who saw them fight in a public place. The witnesses are going to be those who can speak to the intent, speak to the actual charges, like the criminal conspiracy or the sex trafficking charges, not just what they observed on a night in a restaurant.